Hello and welcome. Welcome to another Friday afternoon here at Go Narrative. And I'm excited today because today is not just another website teardown or a big old deep dive into how you can get clearer, cut through and connect with your investors and with your customers, but it's another conversation. And I love when we have the opportunity to have conversations on this show. And without further ado, I am going to introduce Darius Rose. Darius, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matthew, for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
My pleasure. So Darius and I met in the hubbub of the Seattle startup scene at a startup event down in Lake Union, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Last summer, surrounded by founders and folks who are working in startups as well. And you're not a founder yourself, but you've spent a lot of time in the Seattle startup scene, haven't you?
Yes, and as an aspiring founder, someday when life gives me room for that risk, I will definitely take it. So I do what I can to support startup founders, and actually I think taking a little bit after what I've learned from you and telling a little bit of their business stories as much as I can.
Fantastic. So I love how you said that as the aspiring founder. I love working with people who are founders or almost founders, or founders and not quite yet founders.
I love it.
It's a mindset, isn't it? It's what does found mean? It means to establish and to create. And that's something that I know is core to how you think, it's core to how I think. And it's this engine, this force inside us to better ourselves, to learn, to do new things, to challenge the status quo, to find new ways of doing things or to build new ways of doing things. And that's key, because even if you're not a founder today and you're listening to this, you may well be like Darius on that road and looking for that right moment. Maybe you've got the idea and you're figuring out, how do I execute? Or maybe you have got some experience executing and building things, but you haven't taken your idea and done that yet. So does any of that kind of land with you?
Oh yeah. I think that everyone has a unique set of experiences, and there are problems to be solved that would not occur to anyone but yourself in every one of our individual circumstances. So life has a way of shaping our experience to where we have that unique kind of perspective, approaching the world and seeing what could be better. And I think in some sense, I thought about this kind of at a philosophical level a lot, is that the kind of force of life that we have, especially as human beings, is this sort of battle against entropy. Things just naturally fall into disorder. But I think when considering a startup, there's a problem. There's some kind of disorder that affects everyone, uh, at least a large portion of people. And the challenge of the founder is to find a way to bring order and to bring some kind of harmony through some kind of solution. So there's a unique kind of vitality in innovation that I really love.
I love that, to bring order through some type of solution. And that's very much what so many founders do. They identify something that's broken or could be different or better, and they apply a system to it, don't they? And that system
Yep.
brings order. And I love that personally because it makes me think of frameworks, and I'm a bit of a framework junkie. Honestly, because I have to be. I need them for my own survival and execution. But a framework is the beginning of solving that type of problem, right? If you identify, if you look at a mess and you have an idea about how it can be unmessified, shall we say, order brought to it, you immediately start to think, how do I bring order to it? And as you do that, you're coming up with a framework that hasn't existed before, because if it did, that disorder wouldn't be there. So I love that. And I can't help but think about stories and storytelling. So those being tools, those being frameworks to apply a certain sense of order, right? To bring clarity, to bring alignment. And that's ultimately what we're talking about here. And I love helping folks, right? And I'll go ahead and share a little bit about what that looks like from a individual and a company perspective. So if we think about from an individual perspective, what does helping people in this space look like? What does clarity look like? What if it's chaos before and clarity afterwards? What does that look like? What kind of effect does that have? And I love how Hannah says this, even though she uses the word empowered, which, having spent many years at Microsoft and in the Office division, the word empowered was used a lot, shall we say. But the true essence of what the word means, I still believe in, and it's this giving of power, or this discovery of power. And when I say giving, I'm not talking about an outside force necessarily. It's about giving yourself that power. And when it comes to being clear, when it comes to cutting through the noise, we're all dealing with so much, right? We're all dealing with a cacophony of things. Just before the show, Darius and I were talking about our own things we're working on right now. And Darius shared his kind of constellation of big challenges he's working on, and I did the same. And it can be really difficult as a founder to carve out all the time you need for all the things you need. There's so many things that you have to work on. There's no one single magic wand, but there are some key parts of the puzzle. And one of those key parts of the puzzle is anything that's going to help you get clear. And that's what I ultimately love helping with, because I challenge the status quo to clarify a better way. And I do that in all parts of my life. I do it as a father. I challenge my own abilities as a father to clarify what it looks like to be a father, to find a better way to be a father, as a friend, as a partner, as somebody who's involved in any projects that are not work related, and of course work itself. And this type of response from people like Hannah is exactly what gets me up in the morning. It's helping get to this level of clarity. And what we see is it's not just pretty words. When you have a clearer website, you have more engagements. When you have a clearer keynote, you get more people coming up afterwards and finding out how they can learn more. when you are more able to be clearer with your team, you can bring more alignment, you can get everybody working in one direction together. And of course, the age-old famous one, if you can be clearer with investors, you're going to raise more money. And so the tangible impact is very real. And we've worked with a whole variety of organizations and sizes, but we are so passionate about startups and AI and machine learning and all of the work being done in the cloud around data that we are focused on helping you as a founder now, right? As a Series A founder who's realized that the story that got them to Series A isn't going to get them to Series B. And 65% of Series A companies don't make it to Series B. And I would add to that a question. And the question is, out of that 65% who do make it, I should say, out of the 65% who do make it to Series B, how much pain and toil was involved in getting there? And can we remove any of that pain and toil? And that is why I got into this whole storytelling thing in the first place, is what caught my attention. And that is the tool that it represents for this level of clarity. And we actually have to go all the way back to 1978 if we want to see where this all kicked off. So humans are good at pattern matching. We need to be. You've got to be able to assess your environment. Turns out that dyslexic people, of which I am one of those neurodiverse, are particularly good at pattern matching, able to look at the big picture, so look at even bigger patterns. Well, 1978, when I was a mere 6 months old, I was forced into kind of pattern matching overdrive based on our family situation, where we moved, what we were dealing with at the time, what my parents were dealing with. And I had to read the situations in a way that I never would have if I hadn't been in that environment. And it forced me into this sort of over the top obsession with trying to figure out what was going on. And that carried on to the point where in 1986, when my mother encouraged me to keep a diary for the summer holidays in the hope that it would improve my handwriting. Sorry, my dear late mother, but unfortunately, it really isn't very good still. But anyway, it got me going on keeping a diary that then by 1990, I was keeping every single day, capturing those patterns, looking at the patterns around me, looking at the stories around me, obsessing about those stories, trying to figure them out, trying to figure out my own story and all the turmoil that I had experienced in these formative years. And then fast forward to 2012, and I had this dream job offer to be chief storyteller for a division at Microsoft. And it was there where I came head to head, face to face with this idea of using storytelling in business. I'd never explicitly focused on that before. Having been a technologist and a marketer, of course, I was hunting clarity, hunting ways to connect products, teams, partners, partner organizations, partner channels, you name it. But this was like hardcore focus. This was the focus. And when I started to try and figure it out, I panicked. And I don't want you to panic. And the reason why I panicked is I went to go and find some frameworks I could apply, because that's the first thing you do, right? Don't reinvent the wheel if you can help it. And I found all this stuff like the hero's journey and all these sort of complicated entertainment-based storytelling frameworks. And then on the other end of the spectrum, it was beginning, middle, and end. It's like too complicated, too simple. And it just like drove me crazy for a while until I realized, hey, it's okay. I'm getting paid to be chief storyteller. I can be an interpreter. I can be the story interpreter. And I was, and had a lot of fun doing it. And at that time, then had this dream. What if I could actually solve this problem beyond Microsoft? What if I could solve this problem for more people? What if I could actually figure out what these frameworks should look like? And after a family tragedy in 2015, which resulted in me choosing to leave Microsoft, I spent a year at a marketing agency figuring out how to run a small company, double the revenue there. And then in January, February of 2017, I founded Go Narrative. And it was with this express intent of discovering what this Goldilocks approach to business storytelling would be. And it all boils down to, at the end of the day, it starts with heart. It starts with desire. It starts with wanting something. And as a founder, my gosh, you want a lot of things. You want your team to be happy and all pulling in the same direction. You want to raise the money you need to raise. And of course, you want to solve those big problems that we've been talking about. And wouldn't it be lovely if that was all we had to do and then we got it? Unfortunately, there's this whole challenge that seems to stand in the way of all the best things in life, right? The difficulties along the way. But if we work hard and we untangle the knots and we figure it out, we can find our way through to the other side. And these basic elements, which aren't really fully aligned to beginning, middle, and end, they're a little bit more complicated than that. But there is a logical flow there that you need to understand. And I'd found it. I found this Goldilocks framework. If we can start with what people want, figure out what stands in their way, and then help them untangle the knot, then we've got the raw material for what their story is. And we're reading it. We're reading their story, and we're also making it because we're helping them untangle that knot. And it's different to problem, solution, benefit. It's not just about the difficulty and how you then solve it and what the benefit is, right? What did that person, that company, that division, what did they want, right? What is it that they wanted? And then what stood in the way? And that is fundamentally at the core. And it's what I call the power of 3D story. Helps you see your story from more perspectives. And it breaks down to these three components: the desire, the difficulty, and the denouement. And it was that which led me to meeting Darius, obviously, as over the past year or so, we've been shifting Go Narrative to focus on the Seattle startup scene and some beyond, and Series A, and with some flexibility in there. But if you are a founder of a Series A startup in Seattle, we want to help you because we know what it's like to run a startup. We know what it's like to try and solve these big problems. And that's why there are these fantastic events in Seattle that Darius and I met at. And we had a really interesting conversation at that event, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Was there, what stuck out at you from that conversation?
I think that what stuck out is how personal all of our stories are. So when it comes to the stories that intersect with work and professional life, there are so many influences that are deeply personal, despite, I think, some of our intentions and attempts to separate so completely our personal life from our professional life. I think, for example, like what you were describing about the journaling and about your experience when you were young, it shaped some of your interests. It shaped some of how you approach problems and even just had mental frameworks about the world around you. And similarly for myself, I can see the same thing as I have tried to break down those early experiences for myself and see how both they've shaped my interests and how also there's now this kind of decision, and I think this is something that you really helped me with, to identify the pieces of the story that I want to keep, that I want to have stick around, and then others that I'm ready to let go. And I think that is probably true for everyone, that there are some things that served us for a time, and we're ready to move on to new approaches to problems. And then there's some that are just fundamental to how we think and how we operate and how we approach the world, and all the unique perspectives that we all have, and as we shape it into stories, help us to bring new value to the world in ways that only we can. So I really appreciate how you helped me shape my story in that process, and I know that you do it for a lot of people. So grateful for the kind of light that you bring to the world, especially for startups as they're navigating those tricky waters of getting started and having something stick.
It's thank you, and it's funny hearing you describe that because I'm reminded of, and I think you and I had touched on this when we did your story discovery, and that is, it sounds a bit like therapy, doesn't it?
It does a bit, yeah.
But
There's
it's
an
different.
element to it that goes personal, yeah.
But it's different, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. I think it's a very kind of pragmatic view of those things. So I think it does require some level of self-awareness to be willing to explore some of those fundamental reasons for why we think the way we do. But yeah, it is framed in a very forward-thinking way. Like I think you were saying in your introduction, for Go Narrative's focus is just detangling those problems. Like you see the challenge, and there's a reason that you got there. There's a reason that you took that path to the point where you encountered that challenge, and then it's figuring out how to move forward. And I think if I zoom out a little bit, one of the things that I have as one of my core values is that life is not just about being happy. A good life is about fulfillment. And so there are a lot of ups and downs in a life that is truly fulfilling. And I think that one way to really have that kind of life is going through the ups and downs of working on something you're passionate about. And I think that that's something that is really key to the Seattle startup scene, is there are people that are truly passionate about the problems they're trying to solve. And just one last thing I think on the topic is something that really stuck with me from my grad school program is someone telling me, don't get lost in the solution and in the technology, but fall in love with the problem. Like if you fall in love with the problem that you are trying to solve, it's always something that's going to carry you forward, because technology will change, the solution will change, new tools will suddenly be at reach. And if you're trying to solve problems you're really passionate about, then your approach will always change.
I love that. I love that. That's so. It speaks to the universal nature of the nature of founders as well, because people who, if you cut them, they bleed founder, they are in love with the problems. The ones who are able to succeed are in love with the problems. And like we talked about earlier, that's like seeing the mess and being able to figure out that mess doesn't have to be like that. So I love that. And one of the things we work through, obviously for you in particular, was some of the old patterns that you were stuck in. And what everybody needs to understand who's watching this is that Darius is also a really good pattern matcher. In fact, he's also, not only is a good pattern matcher, but he's good at then create or pattern identifier. He's then really good at taking those patterns and making them, I want to say, like physical or practical. And there was actually an experience, Darius, that you had when you were a kid, when you found yourself at a friend's house and there was this kind of no screen time allowed mandate. And what did you and your friend end up doing?
Yeah, we ended up making a sort of board game, kind of something between Risk and Warcraft, I would say. So just some resource management and building up an army and a sort of framework for how you would interact in this then tangible game that was just drawings on paper. And it was interesting because I didn't have the self-awareness at that time or the maturity to really realize that I was going so deep into this creative space, But it really resonated that, especially I was able to go into this creative space with someone else where it was like we were both sounding boards for each other. We'd come up with an idea and the other person would make suggestions on how to tweak it. And it would land, kind of in this ping pong kind of approach somewhere in the middle that we were both happy with. And I think I've found in my most fulfilling professional experiences, it's so similar. It's like this idea exchange until it's something that everyone is excited about, something that everyone is on board about. So yeah, a really fun experience from when I was younger.
What was the problem that you were in love with solving when it came to that?
Oh, I'm not sure what problem we were trying to solve. I think we were just bored and we were 11 or 12 years old. So we were trying to figure out, without screens and being indoors due to inclement weather, how we were going to entertain ourselves. And I guess the problem we were solving is this sort of lack of a tangible board game that incorporated some of the dynamics of video games that were fun at the time as well. So it was just creating a little tangible world that we could interact with.
And that may well be the case. I can't help but think it was, if you could have imagined being a fly on the wall, Darius and his friend going through this process of coming up with this game, that yet there's clearly some boredom elimination that's going on there. But you've got motivations with these two human beings, motivations that tap into the bigger picture of their lives and the bigger picture of what they're interested in. And I can't help but wonder if you were in love with the idea of being aware of these types of games and maybe the mythology around Warcraft or how people can create these things, that you were in love with understanding what those systems were. And this gave you an opportunity to actually express this passion for what we would call systems thinking, if you will, now, or as adults doing serious things. I don't know, how does that resonate?
I think that's true. I think, especially in the sense that I think all kids have a really big imagination. So all kids went through a phase of being really creative and coming up with these new worlds and rules for how you interact with your friends when you're playing. And this was a little bit of an evolution of that into systems thinking and process design, where suddenly it was more tangible. It was coming out of just the imagination and we were putting it on paper. I think that it's probably the first time that I did that. And when I think back to that experience, that time slipped away so quickly, but not in the way that other, let's say, somewhat hollow entertainment would, where I felt just a little bit empty at the end of it. I felt full and invigorated by all these ideas and this sort of engagement that we had with that moment of creating a process and a system and putting it down into that tangible format. So yeah, I think absolutely.
And then through some of your other experiences, you found yourself in some systems or patterns of behavior, didn't you, that you realized were not serving you?
Yeah, I think in particular, the environment I grew up in, I was always trying to get attention through being an achiever. So achievement to me, like you were talking about pattern matching before, it was that if I achieved something, then I got positive recognition. I got more attention at home and I got more acknowledgement from friends. And it felt to me at that time, I think to my immature kind of framework and mental model for the world, that gave me connection. So doing more, achieving more meant connecting more with people. And so I think that is the old pattern that we discussed in the story discovery at some point, is that there was this really strong drive for people pleasing that I had, and it came from a place of survival. I think that we all have these drives to be close to our caregivers and to have basically a tribe in some sense. I think that humans, at least mentally, are very tribal in that sense. You're always looking for gathering people around you that will share resources with you, that will help you to survive. And so it was me finding ways to survive, of bringing people around me. And as we went through the discovery, I think that, in some sense, I was aware of moving beyond the people pleasing for some time now. But the story discovery helped me put it into more of a professional perspective of how to shift that focus into more of owning my story and taking a unique approach to problems and to just the environments that we're in at large to solve new problems. And if I fall into the old patterns, then I'm not going to take enough risks in that regard. Mm-hmm. And so it's a matter of exploring new waters. It's a matter of helping to chart that path and help people navigate through those new waters. And that's largely what I've done with my career so far in client services.
And that you're doing right now for the startup that you work with. Yeah. And I love how you mentioned that you almost just kind of skipped through it really quickly, but you mentioned the connection between your past and those patterns and those core elements of you. You connected that to the people pleasing or the approval as a way that you at one point were expressing that fundamental part of who you are. But then the thing I loved about what you said was the story discovery helped project that up into that professional arena and helped you decode that and then apply that in a productive way where you're able to see, yes, that's right. This is who I am. And this is what I want to be doing, but there's a disconnect. And it's the same for everybody. Like you and I just before the call, we're talking about the ups and downs, and when we're in a chapter of our story, which might be bumpier than another chapter, is often because we're challenging something about ourselves. We're challenging a part of what we're experiencing and the story that essentially that we're currently living. And this is something that every single founder deals with every day, because we are constantly being bombarded with stories, whether that is externally, somebody else is doing something, choosing to do something that's affecting us. Maybe that's our competition, maybe that's our team, maybe that's a government regulation. There's something that's bumping into us. There's some narrative out there that is affecting us. But they're not all external. Some of them are internal. Some of them are our own hang-ups, our own internal critic, right? I was having a chat with a friend recently, talked about one of the best bits of advice I ever had in terms of dealing with hard stuff was, imagine what your best friend would say to you. Because we're often not saying that. We're often our own worst critic. And so we've got these external stories bumping into us, and then we've got these internal stories from our past, from whether it was a bad job experience we had, or a bad founding experience, or something way back in the past to do with our family. We have these things in our head that make us think and act in a certain way. And so you might be listening to this and go, okay, but what does that have to do with me running a business? And I'll give you one example of a story that I was just working on earlier today. This guy called David, he's a COO of this company here in Seattle. And he is wrestling with building repeatable sales. Absolutely something that the COO is going to have as a responsibility. But he's wrestling with it. So why is he wrestling with it? Well, the sales cycle itself is dragging. So it's extending out more than what he'd like. And of course, we know what that's going to impact in terms of sales, proving to our investors that we're worth our salt, all of the stuff that comes with that. So we've got this dragging happening. And then we're trying to implement something that is repeatable and it's just not working. And we're wrestling with it. So how do we connect that, a standard business problem, to something that we've just been talking about? Well, you would have to say, in this example, take David, right? And say to David, what are you trying to do? Like, what are the actions, what are the activities that you've taken when it comes to trying to resolve this particular problem with your sales cycle? Why are you wrestling with it, right? Is it how your sales team are performing? Is it, so just pick a couple, 2 or 3 examples. Is it how your sales team's performing? Is it what the market's hearing from your company or others? So we'll just take those 2 examples. So you take the sales team. If it's the sales team and they are that point of friction, that point of misalignment, that point of unclear, there's a lack of clarity in terms of what's happening. And it might be because they're unclear what they should be doing. It could be you're not clear on what they're doing. It could be that the CRM data, all sorts of things could be happening. So why is that happening? Because David is a part of the equation and the sales team are as well. David's possibly one of the common denominators. So David can take that and then he can start asking himself questions. How am I approaching this? Am I introducing friction? If I am, why am I doing that? Am I doing it because of one of these external stories that's putting pressure on me? Or am I doing it because I've got an internal story that's putting pressure on me? And if the answer is the second one, then he has the opportunity to say, why am I putting this pressure on myself? And if we look back to the stories that he's led through his life, we're going to see the patterns, just like Darius, we were talking about with your patterns, right? And so this is now something that he can do something about. He say, well, maybe I'm saying this type of thing, or maybe I'm approaching it in this way, or maybe I'm taking this amount of time or this amount of time. And there's reasons why, because what's driving me, the thing that's at the heart of my story that's powering me. And as you know, Darius, one of the things that we went through on this from a very personal level, but it's also very professional as well, because it touches everything we do. And that's our why, right? That engine that's driving us. And that combined with the story, in David's case here as the COO of this company, he now has the tools to understand these stories, understand his own story, and then rewrite it. And rewrite it in a way that is going to have a different outcome. Maybe maybe the engagement time shifts. Maybe how often he's chasing up shifts. Maybe how he's communicating shifts. Maybe the questions he's asking shifts. And look at what we're just talking about, one thing, Darius, one part of one role within a startup. We didn't even get onto, and I won't because I've been talking for far too long right now. And that is if the market's not clear, right? Then there's a whole conversation about like what's happening within the organization, the relationship between sales and marketing, the relationship with the competition, and so on and so forth. But that's a way of connecting that personal story and your experiences that we talked about to some very tangible, real challenges that startups have. What kind of challenges have you seen with leadership? Because you've worked in multiple startups. What kind of patterns, or obviously protecting the innocent or the guilty, no names, not asking for any names or any specific roles, but what kind of challenges have you seen leaders have in the story they appear to be living, and you've been on the receiving end of that, and it hasn't really been the best experience, shall we say?
Yeah. I think that the biggest challenges I've seen in leadership in my professional experience so far is when leaders take things very personally that are more just something that needs to be addressed by a big group of people. So, for example, taking something as criticism when it's really meant as feedback, and it's really meant to to have some kind of analogy. In the case of some kind of signaling, like when, let's say, Vikings were out and they blow their horn because something needs to happen. That's really the signal, right? That someone is trying to raise. And I think that when leadership is not aligned to seeing that as a new problem to solve together, and they take it as a criticism and get defensive, then it instantly has a lot of negative impacts. So one, it just decreases everyone's trust and their sense of safety in that environment where everyone should be co-innovating. Everyone should be looking for solutions together to problems. I think in a similar sense, a very common one is silos forming inside of businesses. And I think that leaders are primarily responsible for keeping those silos from forming. I think something that we talked about in my story is that my why is very much aligned about getting everyone to be working on something together. So I like the analogy of helping everyone row in the same direction. So when silos form and different departments are pulling in different directions because that vision is not clear of where everyone is trying to go together, then it brings in more dysfunction in an organization. And so I think for me, my storytelling is trying to get away from taking things personally. And I have to say that I'm not always good about that. I think I am, I have my human fallacies like anyone. But I think in preparation for someday when I am in that hot seat running an organization, then I want to be ready to separate myself from that kind of feedback and see it as feedback and see it as something that everyone can approach together. And I think those are the most fulfilling moments in my career so far. It's just getting everyone on the same page and helping define a process that brings everyone from one point of, let's say, confusion or challenge to a point of improvement. So I really love seeing that kind of process with a group of people.
Yeah, and it's also interesting for a couple of reasons, and one of them is if you're, as a leader, injecting friction into the system, that, and if we take our Series A founder friends who are looking to get to Series B as an example, if you're injecting any type of friction into the system, that is going to do nothing for your readiness when it comes to being ready for Series B. It's going to be working against your ability to compress the funding timeline. There's literally, like, you could just keep going down and come up with this huge list of impacts that it would have, because friction in any system slows it down. I mean, it's the very nature and definition of friction. And if your people are saying something to you and you're not engaging with that, you're pushing back on it, then that creates a point of friction. Now, it doesn't mean that what the team are saying is right, but it also doesn't mean that they shouldn't be heard. And the trick is, and we're getting very specific here, but the trick is in that situation to create a flywheel where the people's voices are heard, they are handled, processed, along with all the other conversations, all the other feedback, and all the other things the organization is trying to do. And then the loop is closed. And it might be that the loop is closed and it's thanks, but no thanks. But here's why, right? Or it could be thanks, and actually we need to change what we're doing, or any other myriad of things. Now that's very specific, like I said, but it's also a specific type of story that's being lived, isn't it? If we go back to what we were talking about with desire, difficulty, and there's a French word, denouement, which is what the untangling of the knot means. It literally means the untangling of the knot. If we go back to that and we look at an organization that's dealing with the type of challenge that we've been talking about here, the desire is to effectively execute as an organization. And in the example I brought in, it's fundraising timeline for Series B. So if that's the desire to compress the Series B funding timeline, and the difficult part of the difficulty is we've identified feedback that may need to be handled. Another part of the difficulty could be we're hearing from our team that the ranks are not happy. And as a leader, that should be a red flag, right? You should wake up and smell the coffee with that, especially if multiple people are saying things. But the ins and outs of it aren't as important as identifying this and calling it out as the difficulty. And the reason why this is how I like talking about it as opposed to problem solution benefit is, okay, now we've got to untangle this knot. How do we do that? Untangling a knot is not just one thing. It is multiple pulls at the string, possibly using tools over a period of time. And as somebody who does crabbing out on the Puget Sound on a stand-up paddleboard, I can tell you when you've got 100 foot of line and you're halfway through dropping a pot and you get a knot in your line, that can be a pretty tricky untangling to do. So I'm not saying that all the untangling is easy, but because you know this now, this simple seeing the story from all perspectives, knowing is half the problem, solve half the solution. It gives you that power as a leader to step back. And if you're a founder, it gives you the power to step back and say, okay, so we're trying to compress the funding timeline. That's one thing we want. Maybe there's some other things we want as a part of this. Happy team, for example, that's going to keep contributing. We've got these difficulties and we've got an idea on how we're going to untangle the knot. We can now make that story. And that is the beauty of story as a tool, is that's about alignment. Like at the beginning, I was saying like clarity is a big thing, alignment's a big thing. That's solving an alignment problem. And you just use this very specific, very simple tool to solve this alignment problem. And so thanks for that example. It's a great one.
Matthew, if I can ask, what do you think most of these Series A companies are going for that milestone between Series A and Series B? Is it an MVP? Is it beyond an MVP to something that is more readily sold on market?
It's getting from $150,000 of monthly recurring revenue to $180,000 or $200,000, and more in some cases. Because you have to be able.
Sorry, go ahead.
Because you have to be able to prove. Because like there's a lot of pieces. There's several key pieces of puzzle for Series B. And one of them, of course, Matthew Woodget of Go Narrative is going to say that having a clear strategic narrative is important. But another one of the pieces of the puzzle is knowing and showing the numbers. Because if I'm going to invest in you, if we're talking about tens of millions of dollars of investment or more, even for Series B, then I'm going to want to have a really confident roadmap of where this thing's going. And to achieve that as a founder, you need to be able to articulate what the numbers were, what they are, where they're going to be. And you use the word milestone. I love it. So what are the milestones going to be? And the funny thing is that whilst the data is so important with all of this, you have to have done the research, know what market opportunity is, know what your attrition rates are, know the cost of acquisition, all of these things that you need to understand. Data is a proxy for something. Data is nothing. Data is an abstraction. It is an idea. It is not a thing. Data is a descriptor of a thing. It is like, I am holding one pen, but one pen was such a tiny part of what I am holding. Pen one is a component of that. It's a fraction of that. And the investors don't just want to see the numbers. They want confidence that this company is going to hit the numbers. And where does that confidence come from? It comes from that founder being able to articulate the big picture of that number, not just the number, not just that what, but how we're going to get to that what. The people, the process, the approach, the why. Because we've got, quite frankly, the best people. We've recruited the best. They're the most passionate. They know how to solve these problems. And they all believe in this particular mess that we're trying to solve, that I believe in, that my co-founders believe in. And what are we doing now? We are telling the story. And the best stories, by the way, have data as well. Like, otherwise, it's just fluff, right? So data and story are like hand in glove, Darius. And that is the milestone, the long-winded answer to your question about what they're trying to get from between Series A and Series B.
I love it. I think if I can share a couple things, just thoughts on that. So I studied at the University of Washington in a technology innovation program. And so I loved hearing stories of founders who built things, especially startups. And I think the stories are so important. I think it starts with a story that they kind of build for themselves, the story of the problem that they're trying to solve and what they're doing to solve it. And that's probably how they got their Series A funding or their angel funding or whatever to start, right? That's where they got started, is having a compelling enough story that someone, at least one person, was willing to put some money on the line for them to try to make that happen. And I think as it expands from there, there's a lot more storytelling. Then maybe you're bringing on a co-founder, or at very least some employees who are going to help you execute that vision. And your story has to be compelling enough, especially in Seattle, that they're not chasing a job at a FANG company or a large, comfortable job where things are more stable. Your story has to be pretty compelling to pull them away from that and to really adopt that vision. And then there's the stories to your investors on a continued basis. And if I can share just one thing I heard in a book from Tony Fadell. So he largely responsible for the iPod and the iPhone at Apple. And so he works closely with Steve Jobs. And he talked about how Steve Jobs, for all the good and bad of Steve Jobs, he owned the story so well. He told a compelling story when they were releasing a product. It wasn't just about the data, it was using some of the data, and it was telling a compelling story about why people were going to use a product. And that's why people got behind it so much. But I think it was very strong in all his communication. So the example in that book is that he would take all the bad news directly to every member of his board, because his board they were keeping him employed, right? So he'd go to every member of the board if there was any bad news, and he'd share it with them on a phone call or over a meal, however he could get that information across so he could answer any questions and it didn't blow up in the board meeting. And then in the board meetings, especially when things were uncertain, he would come with a new exciting prototype or something that conveyed that story of what they were doing. It was a tangible, real reflection of the story that they were building. And so he was a master of telling a story that was compelling to people. And I think that is why he has the legacy that he does today, is that he was able to engage people on both an intellectual and an emotional level with those stories, and to just keep them going from point A to point B with that vision and that excitement for the story. So I think at some level, everyone who is chasing a new fun problem has to have some very good storytelling.
And I like is Steve Jobs is I always have to kind of challenge myself not to invoke him, because it's such a it's a narrative people understand, though, and that's why it is useful, because we as humans, all humans are at least basic pattern matchers, and we put things in boxes, we label things, and it's a shortcut to understanding it. It saves calories, right? It's an evolutionary benefit. And the Jobs narrative is really good at conveying a lot of that stuff. And I've heard a lot of the Jobs narrative this week because of the Apple launch, which couldn't have been further from a 10,000 songs in your pocket statement. But the thing I particularly loved about the story that you told, of the storytelling that he did, was, and you did as a story, because you included the wants, you included the difficulties, and you included how he untangled it. So you're doing the storytelling, and that is, it's not just about the market. And this is something that sometimes causes a little bit of a shock and a moment of pause when people get this, because when we eventually start talking about story and storytelling, as opposed to what people want, which is the clarity and team alignment, when we start to talk about story and storytelling as the tools to get there, there's a little bit of a kind of a taken back moment when people clicks, like, of course, right? Of course it's not just about the market. Of course it's about convincing the board. Of course it's about attracting the right talent. Of course it's about demonstrating to investors. Like, all the pieces suddenly fall into place, and when you realize that to unlock this clarity and this alignment across all these things, you need something that's a common red thread through all of it. It's kind of like how you talk about this turning point that you had in redefining the climb and embracing discomfort and having that be a part of the journey. And the way I think you articulated it was like sort of being your own hero, right? That is recognizing the story that you're in and taking control of it. And that's what Steve Jobs did as well. And it's not about conning people. It's not about lying. It's about effectively articulating why, right? Because at the end of the day, if having 10,000 songs in people's pockets didn't matter, then it wouldn't have resonated. That is not a con job. That is connecting the dots and tapping into the understanding that is so important. And that's why the Steve Jobs narrative is a good one to use as well, because it helps us understand narratives, right? It's like we do ourselves a service when we can make things easy for people to understand, when we can make them clear. And so it's great, like with tell me a bit about the being my own hero thing, because people get what a hero is, right?
Yeah, so at a high level, I won't get too personal on this platform, but a lot changed, especially the timing of my graduation in early 2024, when the job market was starting to deteriorate. And I was leaving school hoping to get into product management, which is quite aspirational. It's in the research and development side of the house. And when companies are cutting investment, it's difficult to find something, especially in a career pivot. So I think something that really stood out as I worked with the story that we developed together is that there are a lot of challenges in life at times, and it's really easy to feel like we're falling victim. At least I can say for myself, it felt very easy to me that I was falling victim to circumstances that I could not control. And while that is true, in some sense, I don't have to stay a victim in those circumstances. So I think a later conversation we had as I was working with my story is how becoming my own hero in the sense of owning my story was really important. So it was this pivot of feeling like I was victim to these circumstances to figuring out what I had within my control that I could shape my environment and move from one place to another. And I think more and more I've thought about it within this larger analogy of seafaring. So um, a lot of the story that we talked about for myself is about navigating, helping people navigate new problems. And within this context of this pivot of looking at the challenges and the problems and pivoting to a point of being my own hero, I've thought about it in the context of it can be really easy to feel like I am a victim to the tides in that analogy of being on the sea. And those tides push really hard. Those tides are incredibly powerful, just like the market forces that we don't have control over. And it felt like for a long time like I was being pushed into an environment where I had no control. But I've shifted this mindset. I don't know if I'm borrowing this from someone where maybe I read a book or something, but I've come up with this kind of uh, rallying cry for myself that I'm no longer the victim of the tides. I'm the captain of my own ship, and I think you've helped me realize that through the discovery of my story. Is that it's not about telling this story that reinforces the challenges that we have in life, that of the circumstances we don't have control over. And I think this is probably relevant for founders as well. But it's about finding the next thing that you can control. Okay, so who's the next person that you can talk to? Because you got 10 no's. Who's the next person you can talk to who might be interested in the problem that you're trying to solve? And I think you can think about it in the context of, well, those 10 no's were 10 people that would have been bad partners for you in developing that vision and bringing it to life. And when you find some alignment to someone who is excited about your vision and is ready to jump on board and help you develop it, then there's alignment in purpose and values. And I guess that's where my analogy coming in would be that as the captain of the ship, you can figure out where you're going to steer it, and you can figure out where you're going to take that challenge to find the next opportunity, because it probably lies at the end of a whole lot of no's, but there is a yes somewhere.
And that's and founders deal with that, right? Whether it's finding the right people for the team, getting investors, and your analogy there made me think of the story of the buffalo versus the cow, right? And if you look at the plains out in the Midwest, when there's a storm coming, the cows will run away from the storm, and the bison, the buffalo, will actually turn and head into the storm. And I kind of wonder if that's why they've got the big fluffy stuff around but they end up spending less time in the storm because they're charging into it. The cows, on the other hand, trying to get away from it, and the storm's coming, they spend longer in the storm. They're exposed to that. They're colder. More of them will die because of it. And similar, obviously different, but similar to what you were talking about in terms of being the captain of the ship and grabbing control, taking control, maintaining control. And that doesn't mean not involving your team, right? It means being the leader that you need to be, right? And whether it's the fact that we control our own story, or the fact that sometimes we can feel like it's broken, right? And if it's really not that the story's broken, it's that where we are in our story right now is at a lower ebb, it's at a down spot. But man, I tell you, every time I'm having a conversation with somebody who's going through some tough times, or I'm talking to myself if I'm going through a tough time about something, one of the things I say is, this is one of those moments that you'll look back on as being one of those tough moments, and it's going to bring texture and you're not only going to be able to make it through it to something better, but when you look back from that better place to this time now, it's going to feel even better where you are, because you'll realize what you've achieved. And you can view it like a sine wave, right, with the ups and downs of business and of life. But it's very easy in the moment to get trapped by it being broken. Oh, we didn't get that funding, and the world's crumbling down, we're never going to get funding, right? Because it's easy to catastrophize. It's easy to have a misfire on our pattern matching, right? We failed this one, therefore all others will be a failure. But if we embrace that fact that our story isn't broken, it's a story, and so there's difficulties in it. Our job now is to untangle that and find the right way forward. And as a leader, that is so important, because nobody wants to work at a startup where the founder is just an emotional yo-yo swinging back and forth. When things go great, it's great, but when they're going badly, it's like the sky's falling, right? They want to work for a founder who frames things in a way that inspires them to be able to be a part of solving for this mess that the startup's trying to solve for. And quite frankly, if what startups are doing and founders are focused on is identifying problems in the world and finding ways to, falling in love with the problem, like you said, I love that, and finding ways to solve that problem, then do that in the moment as well. Do that every single day with the challenges in the business. Do that when you don't get that funding, right? And the great thing as well is then you got a story to tell about it. Like literally, I do this because I'm a story geek, right? But I'll take a call recording with my team and I'll go back through it and look at it and pull out the stories from it, and then use the stories with the team and also put them in my story bank, because we are literally every single day this is a little mini story. It's a part of a bigger story. So Darius, thank you so much for joining me today.
Matthew, thank you for having me.
Any final thoughts on the sort of the uncovering your narrative arc and what that impact has been for you?
Yeah, I think in closing, it's very well. The quote that you had from Hannah was about empowerment, and I would second that. I feel very empowered to own my journey, despite it being difficult and despite there being some unexpected bumps along the way. It's a journey that I'm committed to and that I am finding some fulfillment in, even though I cannot say I'm always happy with every turn. But I think that for your audience, largely these founders and these people building startups in the Seattle community, that's an expected part of the journey. And if everything went so smoothly, then it would not be the story of vision and passion meeting sweat, blood, and tears to get there. So I love the Seattle community. I'm really happy to be involved in this conversation. So thank you for having me. Thank you, leading up to this and helping me identify that story that has been so empowering. Because I think it has really been a strong pivot for me to own that story, to become the captain of my ship moving forward. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. And it's a testament to the importance of investing in your own story as a founder, or as a almost founder, because as you've described, it's given you the tools to have more control over your professional decisions. That is whilst it's not a magic wand that solves all problems, it is a vital tool to help with that alignment of the team and that clarity of the message, and connecting your story as a founder to the story of your team, to the story of the company, and to have all of that work in unison as one clear narrative that is going to contribute to the change that you're trying to make in the world. So yeah, I think that's wonderful, and thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and I think to that last point that you made, I think that good founders, good leaders, they inspire people to dream big and to work hard to make those dreams a reality. So it's about inspiration. It's not about invoking fear. So having a good story is paramount to having that kind of inspirational effect on people around you.
Well, and that's another part of it, right? As a founder, I've never met a founder that didn't want to have a positive impact on the people around them. Some of them have struggled to implement that, but they all want it. So thank you so much, Darius. It's been a pleasure having you on the stream. And I hope that whether you've watched this live or you're listening to this as a recording, drop comments below, questions, DMs. Please go ahead and go along to our website where we have a business storytelling assessment. It takes about 10 minutes to do, and it's all questions about your business. It's not even about story, like, because as we've established on this call, storytelling, they're tools to achieve things, right? So the questions are about your business, understanding where your business is and how you're trying to professionally wrangle all of that. And that will give you your story type that you can start using as a filter to find the right metaphors, to listen for the right stories, whatever it happens to be. And that's a great first step to take. Likewise, shoot us an email, gnhelp@gonarrative.com, or shoot me a DM. I reply to all DMs on LinkedIn. Options to reach out and get some help with that way to clarity and that way to alignment. And I know you've got a lot on your plate, and super excited to help you with that and help you use storytelling as a part of that solution. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining today. And I will leave us with the slide that we have at the end here, which has got that contact details on it as well, just so everybody can check it out. And happy storytelling, and we'll see everybody next week. Thank you, Darius, and thank you, everybody, for joining.